Well, it all really came together in the fall of 1965. By that time, I was a fifth year senior in college. Um, just because of my folks not having a lot of money and no scholarships and student loans and having to work, it was going to take me 5 years to complete college. And in the fall of 65, that's when things started picking up in Vietnam. There's even that movie out about what happened in the Nha Trang Valley. And the draft board said, you're taking too long, and they took away my student deferment. So I went down for my physical.
Larry,
Um,
excuse me, where were you going to college?
at that time, at Wisconsin State University, Oshkosh.
Okay.
And I went down for my physical. A couple days later, a friend of mine called up and said, hey, he said, the other fellows that went down to Milwaukee with us are getting their draft notice. This was on a Friday, so I thought I better do something. I always had the intention of joining the military. I was an ROTC in college. My goal was the following spring of 66 to get my degree and go to OCS. But the draft board said, no, that's not going to happen. So Monday morning, because I was an Air Force ROTC, I went down and I wanted to join the Air Force, but Oshkosh not being a big town, the Air Force recruiter wasn't in. So I went across the hall and joined the Navy. And so that's, there was a little more to it than that, but that's basically what happened. My dad was in the Navy, so I had, and then familiar with Navy ROTC in college. Um, so that's how I got in the Navy. Just kind of beat the Army draft by a couple days. So I was a volunteer enlistee, not a draftee officially. Took a about
Your ROTC work was Air Force ROTC?
Yes, it was.
Were
Yes.
you involved with aviation at all, as a
Uh,
hobbyist or otherwise?
no. See, I originally went to Purdue University, and that was a land grant college, and you had to take 2 years of ROTC. I was then in my junior year in the advanced corps, but because of some student loan problems, I had to go back to Wisconsin to go to college in state to be able to afford it. And then I was officially out of ROTC, but like I said, the intention was in the spring of 66 to get my degree and go to OCS, but draft board, like I said, had different ideas. So, but I finished out that semester, went on active duty, went to boot camp in early March of 66 at Great Lakes. That was
Did you consider naval aviation at all?
not at the time, not at the time. Basically, the Navy recruiter guaranteed me something in electronics, and so I thought, well, I will do that. I will take that. That'll help for even the college, and then when I'm done with the Navy in 4 years, I'll go back. I'll have the GI Bill, and I'll go back to college. It turns out that didn't happen for 20 some years, but that was kind of the intention. Um,
How old were you when you enlisted?
I was 22 when I enlisted. Like I said, I was a fifth year senior in college at the time, so I was 22. One of the oldest guys in boot camp. Most of the guys there were 18, 19 years old at the time. So was in boot camp until, let's see, late May of 66. And at that time, we started getting our orders where we were going to go. Um, I got orders that I would be in the fire control technician program. Asked our company commander, who was a gunner's mate, the chief gunner's mate. I says, wait a minute. I says, I thought I was getting something in electronics, like an electronics tech. And I said, this says FT. I says, what's an FT? And so he told me, and he says, be thankful. He says, you don't want to be an electronics tech. You want to be in fire control tech. And he was right. I mean, there was, as far
Why?
as I was, the greatest field.
Why?
Because we got all the electronics training that electronic technicians get, but we actually had a job to do that was absolutely involved in every facet of what was happening in Vietnam, gunfire support. I mean, that was the role of the Navy in 1965, 1966 was changing from a Cold War anti-submarine mode, well, to, we had to gear up for Vietnam. And Vietnam was, amongst other things, chasing carriers, but also mainly gunfire support. And so they needed gunner's mates, they needed fire control technicians. And so instead of going to A school, there was several of us in our company and at that time that they said, we need fire control technicians out in the fleet. We'll send you to A school 6 months, 8 months, 9 months from now, but we need bodies out in the fleet. So instead of going to electronics school, which about a year later, that's what they were doing to guys. They were sending them right from boot camp to A school. I flew out to San Diego and picked up the USS Hull, DDG-13. And they were in the midst of preparing to go to Vietnam. And so I got as familiar as I could with the system. And then in August of 1966, we left for Westpac.
Was the Hull a newly commissioned ship, or was it an older ship?
No, that was a new one. The DDGs at the time, that was an Adams class. It was commissioned, I think it was in 1963 or 1964. So it had the new style gun mounts, had the new style computer, the new style radars for that particular era.
What year was this? Was this 1966?
Yeah, this was in August of '66 that we left for Westpac.
Okay.
And I think that was the first time that the Hull went to Westpac.
Okay. Was that your first time at sea?
Yes, it was, which was quite an experience. The Pacific Ocean is a little bit different than the lakes of Wisconsin. So, needless to say, it took a while to kind of get the sea legs and get used to being out to sea aboard ship. Let's put it that way. But anyway, on the way over to Westpac, I think one of the most impressive things, or one of the most impressive memories I have of that, is we stopped in Pearl Harbor. And aboard a destroyer, when you only have about 250 guys, all the divisions are responsible for multiple tasks. So our G division, which is the fire control techs and the gunner's mates, were responsible for manning one of the lines when we came into port. So we were topside on the deck when we pulled into Pearl Harbor. And one of the other guys who had been to Pearl Harbor before, he said, just wait. He says, we're going to go by the Arizona. And when we got close to the Arizona, one of the boatswains up on the bridge pipe attention on deck. Everybody stopped what they were doing, and you stood at attention and you saluted until you're past the Arizona. And that was one of an impressive thing for me, because it was just the honor that the Navy gave to previous sailors, if you will. It was just something that was part of the service at that time, and you didn't forget what people did in the past. So that was kind of an impressive thing. But anyway, we stayed in Pearl Harbor a couple of days, went to Subic Bay in the Philippines, and then we went out on the gun line. Well, we didn't go on the gun line, first of all. We went up in the Tonkin Gulf on search and rescue. And I don't know if they did it just because this was the first time the Hull was over there, and they thought, well, we'll take it easy on you for a while, and you're just going to go up and run in circles and do search and rescue. But we were up there for, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 days. And because we're FTs, we would hear from Combat Information Center about things that were happening a little bit before the rest of the crew. And we heard from them that a pilot went down right outside of Haiphong, and we were going to go in and pick him up. And they said I don't know what it was like, we were probably about 40 or 50 miles off of Haiphong at the time, and it was going to take about an hour and a half to get there, maybe just a little bit less at flying speed. And about 10 minutes later, we went to general quarters. And it makes you stop and think that, yeah, off San Diego and off San Clemente, you went to general quarters and you practiced this and you drilled for that. But when they finally say general quarters, and they don't say this is a drill, it makes you stop and think, yeah, we're at war. We're going into Haiphong. There were a couple of other aircraft they said that were overhead of this pilot that was down, but they were running out of fuel and ammunition. They couldn't protect him. And so we went to general quarters, lit off our radar, lit off the computer, lit off the gun mounts, if you will, and we were going to do what we had to do. We were still about, probably 20, 25 minutes away from being able to get to the pilot and do what we had to do. And we got the message that the North Vietnamese had picked him up. So that was kind of our first experience, and unfortunately we didn't get there in time to do any good. But
Larry, what was your battle station? Where were you?
I varied between the gun director and but mostly down in the plotting room, in the fire control plotting room.
And where was the gun director?
Gun director was up on the signal bridge, which was right above the main bridge itself. And so that was in the forward part of the ship. We only had one of them on the DDG. We had 2 gun mounts, but we had 1 gun director up there.
What were the biggest guns you had?
We had we had the 5-inch guns on the whole. What are they? 5-inch. What do they call them? 5-inch 51s, 5-inch 54s, something like this. They were. It's later on the Leonard F. Mason in New Jersey. We had the 5-inch 38s, which were the 38s, the 51s, so on. Just referring to the rifling in the guns. But these had a range of about 12 miles. They were semi-automatic, if you will, compared to the old guns on the older style guns on the New Jersey. Every time on those older style guns, you had to have somebody loading the shell and also the powder case. These, it would be automatic, and the rate of fire was about twice as fast than on the older style guns. So one of the other things we had up there, one time we were up on search and rescue, and I was up in the gun director that time, and they, we were out to sea, and they said that 2 A4 Skyhawks were coming out into the Tonkin Gulf, and one of them had been hit, and that he couldn't make the carrier, and he was going to get out as close to the ship as he could before he bailed out. Well, he actually made it out to our ship, and I was watching him, we were tracking him from the gun director, and I was watching him through the rangefinder, and I thought, well, I don't see any smoke coming out of the plane. I don't see any problem. He had engine problems, but nothing visible. And then all of a sudden, the canopy just went boom right behind him. And then he's right behind it with his orange parachute. And there must be something that's said on those A4s, because the A4 went into a dive about 45 degrees and just went down into the Tonkin Gulf right away. But he was, you know, he got out. Okay, by that time, the carrier had got a helicopter up there. And so the helicopter picked him up. But the first thing they do is they bring any pilots to the closest ship, and they want to bring them to sick bay and check him out. So they brought him to our ship, and you know, they just lower him. The helo just hovers over the fantail, and they lower him down. And so he would, you know, they checked him out in sick bay. He was okay. He spent the night aboard ship. And then the next day, the carrier, and I don't even remember which carrier it was, sent the helo back, picked him up, and took him back to the carrier. So at least we got a chance to be part of the rescue of one pilot at that time. So aboard the whole, we would alternately go from gunfire support, usually by the DMZ and I Corps, to just up off a high phone 50, 60 miles doing search and rescue, or sometimes we would chase carriers. And chase carriers, they usually have two destroyers, one following it by about 2,000 yards, and then one off to the port or starboard side, maybe 1,000 yards. And it was mainly because the carriers can't stop or turn on a dime. So if anything would happen, we were there to kind of assist with any rescue. And by happening that any aircraft missed the carrier, went into the sea, or something happened on takeoff, we were there to assist with that. Plus, part of their battle group is their defense too. We did actually have one thing that happened off. We were doing. Now I'm back tracing here a few months to the summer of '66. We were doing some operations off Hawaii, and I forgot, we were with the Enterprise one time, but I don't remember if this was with the Enterprise. And they had an A3 jet that was taken off. The catapult failed. Needless to say, basically, I hate to say it, but they threw him in the water. And so, you know, the carrier had to go on. It's got planes in the air. It's got to recover and launch aircraft. And so we were responsible for picking up any pilots, doing any rescue that we could. Unfortunately, I think the A3 has two pilots, and neither one survived. But
were you able to recover the pilots?
We didn't. We didn't. I don't know if they were ever recovered by another ship or not. I just don't know. The only thing we found was parts of the aircraft. So, but anyway, that was most of the experiences on the whole. We stayed over there till January of '67 in Westpac. And we went back to Yokosuka, Japan, and we're going to be on the way back to San Diego. That's when I got orders for electronics school, and I flew back from Japan to the U.S. so I could get to Great Lakes school in time. So I didn't make the trip back with the whole, but that's all she was going to do when I got off her at that time, is just transit back to San Diego. So I spent the winter and spring of 1967 at Great Lakes going to electronics school. And that was kind of a unique experience because by that time they didn't need as many fire control techs or as fast out in the fleet. And so there, in our class of about 20, there were, I want to say 5 or 6 of us that had been to Vietnam, and all the rest of the guys were just out of boot camp. And so that was right away, you had a distinction of guys that were still never been to sea, never saw a fire control computer, never shot at anybody, there were 5 or 6 of us that had been over in Vietnam and come back again. So, I mean, it's just right away you had kind of a 2 cliques, if you will, in electronics school. You know, the ones of us that had been over there, we kind of hung out and kind of pointed our fingers at these other guys and said, wait a minute, you're still wet behind the ears. Don't tell us, you know, what you went through in boot camp. We've been there and been back again. So, but if I can relate one experience that happened at A school, they wanted us to stand inspection one day. And when I was over in Vietnam, the first, or Westpac the first time, there's no two ways about it. I lost weight. When we were in Hong Kong over there, I had a tailor-made uniform. You know, just everybody did it. It was just looked nicer than the boot camp issue uniforms. Well, when we were supposed to stand inspection, they said, well, you can't wear your tailor-made uniform that you got in Hong Kong. You have to wear a boot camp issue. Well, I went up to Wisconsin because my folks still lived in Oshkosh then. And I said, Dad, I said, you still got your Navy uniform? And he said, yeah. And I says, well, my pants, my trousers don't fit anymore. They're just too big. I lost weight. So I tried his on and they fit. So I took his back to Great Lakes. That week I stood inspection, and I remember the chief coming by, and I had on my own blouse, you want to say, jumper. That was my original, but I had these other trousers on, and he looked at me and he looked up and he looked down and he looked up and he looked down and he looked back up and he said, are those boot camp issue? And I said, yes, sir. And I said, but I didn't say yes, sir, but they were boot camp issue in 1943. So, you know, he saw there was a difference, but the uniform hadn't changed that much in 20 some years. So that was, you know, just one of those little things that, because I didn't feel like going out and paying money for a new set of trousers. And so I wore my dad's for a while when I was at Great Lakes.
Did
So
they say why they wouldn't let you wear the custom tailored?
it was because it was a different material. It made us stand out. Like I said, the rest of the guys were just boot camp or just out of boot camp. And they just wanted everybody to look as uniform as possible. So they said, yeah, you can wear it on Liberty, you can wear it any other place, but you just can't wear it for inspection. So, but anyway, I was at A school until, let's say, June of '67. Went back to the USS Hull, and we were preparing to go back to Vietnam. It would have been, I think, in about October of '67. But then in early September, I got orders. The Leonard F. Mason DD-852 was leaving for Westpac, and they said they need one more fire control technician. I don't know why. All of a sudden, they figured out 2 days before they were going to leave that they needed one, but I got orders. They said, you're going up to Long Beach, you're going to pick up the Leonard F. Mason, and you're going to be on your way to Westpac in Vietnam in 2 days. So I left the hole, got in a bus, got up to Long Beach, reported aboard one day, and they said, okay, here's your rack. Then tomorrow morning, we're leaving for Westpac. So in September of '67, I went back with Leonard F. Mason. So that was a gearing class destroyer, the typical ones that you call the World War II type destroyers. It was commissioned in 1943 or 1944, something like that. But it had underwent an extensive modification sometime in the early 60s, and they had put the ASROC, anti-submarine rockets, aboard, took off one of the gun mounts, and so instead of the World War II configuration of 3 gun mounts, we had the new Gearing class configuration of only 2 gun mounts on the Mason. It had the old style analog, mechanical analog computer. Aboard the hull, we had one that it was still an analog computer, but it was all electronic. This was operated with gears and servo motors and ball bearings and cams and integrators, but boy, was that thing accurate. It was accurate. So,
More accurate than the electronic?
no, I wouldn't say that, but for a computer that was designed in the 1930s and it was all mechanical, and when you had to track a target, you just turned it on and you would hear it go ka-chunk, 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 and making all funny noises. But as I always say, when we did gunfire support over there, if we had a spotter, we could put within 3 rounds, we could have the shells basically in your lap, if you will. It was unbelievable how accurate that thing was. I don't know how it was with other destroyers. I got something I got to relate in a little bit that just kind of shows what we could do with that thing. So anyway, we left, went to Pearl Harbor, ended up in Subic Bay, and then we went on the gun line doing about the same thing we did when I was with the Hull. Went up in the Tonkin Gulf on the SAR station, chase carriers, but I think we were doing more gunfire support then, and on the Mason is when we actually would get up into North Vietnam or off the coast of North Vietnam, and we'd do shore bomb up there, as well as down by the DMZ and I Corps and 2 Corps and all the way down the coast of Vietnam. One of the things, now I did 2 deployments on the Mason. The first one we went over in September of '67, came back in March of '68, spent a few months in the States, and then in August of '68 we went back over to Vietnam. So some of these things I'm going to tell you, they're going to be on either one of those deployments. One of the things that we could not do on a destroyer that we could on the New Jersey, because they had several gun directors, had several guns, numbered, well, 5-inch guns on port and starboard, we could take on multiple targets at one time. On a destroyer, you had one computer, even though you had 2 gun mounts, but because you had one computer, you could only do one target. No 2 ways about it. You can't, you could switch from one to the other, but you could only fire at one target at a time. Well, one time our weapons officer came down and he said, there's another Army unit that's in big trouble. It's close by the one we're firing at now. What can we do? And it was like, well, nothing. We can either support one, or then we can go support the other, and then you leave the other one by themselves. But we had a few manual inputs on a computer called the Star Shell computer. This was attached to our main computer, and we fired the regular rounds out of one mount, and then you could fire star shells, flares, if you will, at the same target, and they would just burst 1,500 feet in the air. And then to be on a little parachute, and they'd just float down so the spotter could see the target then. But what you could do, main computer, you could manually offset things a little bit. You know, told their weapons officer, we can try to make the Star Shell computer support this other unit by offsetting almost to the maximum. So it was like, I don't know if any other destroyer ever did this before. I'm sure somebody did. But that particular night, we inputted by putting an extreme offset into the Star Shell computer because this other unit was close. And so we were able to we fired regular shells using the Star Shell computer. And so we're able to support 2 Army units that one night at the same time. And I mean, that was, I had to think back of it. I had I don't know if you'd call it a bad habit or a funny habit. I found the old fire control manuals that they had aboard ship, and I had a habit of just, when I wasn't doing anything else, just to read those things. Just, you know, and then plus you had 5 years of college physics and college math and everything. And I thought, well, that one evening, just being able to recompute in my head, if you will, what we had to do with that Star Shell computer to be able to configure it, instead of the shells going off 1,500 feet above the enemy and just flares, we could shoot the regular shells and make them land right where the VC were. And so it was 5 years of college did pay off one time.
That's good old American ingenuity.
Yeah, you know, kind of think on your feet. There's another time we had, this was during TET. And this was in early 68, and we came back in March of 68, but we were over there for, when did TET officially, or not officially start, but in late January of 68 is when they really started doing their offensive. And we had one Marine unit that we were supporting one night. And to say we had intensive gunfire support is kind of an understatement. But what happened then, the next day we went and supported different units, but then the next night our weapons officer came down and said, we're going back and we're supporting the same Marine unit that we did the night before. And says, well, you know, why? And he said, because they called and asked for us by name. He said the Marines asked for the Leonard F. Mason. They didn't want just, you know, whatever destroyer was in the area. They wanted the Navy to send Leonard F. Mason back to their area and support them. And I keep thinking of all you know, the campaign service ribbons they give you and all the funny little stars they put on it, and even as the honor that it was to get the Navy unit commendation on the New Jersey, to have the Marines ask for the Leonard F. Mason by name. Excuse me. I mean, here's a bunch of Marines that put their lives in your hands. And so we did that for one more night, and then either the Marines in their infinite wisdom or the Navy said this Marine unit can't have their own private destroyer to support them in their operations. So they sent us off, and you know, we never got back to that area again. But anyway, it was just, you know, like I said, just to have the Marines ask requests for our ship, because we had done the job better than any other destroyer over there, period. So anyway, one other thing during TET, that was an intense time for the Navy. There's no two ways about it. And I remember we were standing watches then, 4 on, 4 off. And then the 4 hours you had off, that was the time to eat, sleep, and do your regular work. And it was just, we were doing gunfire support all day long. So there was just, and even if it wasn't your 4 hours on, you were down in plot or you were up in the gun director just helping out whoever was there. And when we finally caught a break, then we had to go out and rearm and refuel. And it was just, as soon as we got done doing that, and we took on so many rounds that night, because the ammunition ship was just saying, hey, you know, what's going on over there? And, you know, you can read the history of how intense that was. They said, we're going to give you as many rounds as you guys can take. And so we filled up both magazines. And then in the bosun mate division, or the deckhand division, they had their sleeping compartment right outside the magazine. So I don't know what there was. There was almost 100 rounds that we just put in the racks of these guys and said, you go find a different place to sleep. And we strapped the shells down in their racks and went back to the gun line and just said, okay, we're going to use these first. And so the guys who were passing them up or loading them up, they just send the stuff on the guys' bunks first, and just to get them out of there. But for, you know, almost a day, that wasn't standard procedure to store 5-inch shells any place other than in the magazines. But it was you had to do what you had to do. And we got back to the gun line. We went that whole day, that whole night, and all of a sudden it was just, we caught a break the next morning, and everyone kind of looked at everyone else and said, hey, we've been up for 48 hours doing this, either rearming, refueling, gunfire support here, gunfire support there. And it was just like, okay, everybody finally crashed. But it's the only time we had such an intense period that we were up for literally 48 hours. And yeah, it was, like I say, kind of an intense time that way. One of the things we found that kind of relate a story in a bit about the New Jersey is destroyers don't handle moderate or heavy seas very well. We used to joke that, you know, if we had any kind of, and we would catch the tail end of typhoons and so on, we would always joke, we're eligible for sub pay, because when you stand on the second deck when you're 20 foot over the water line and you look up at the signal bridge and water's coming down on you, you know you're in heavy seas, that's the type of spray you took. Or you stand on the second deck of it where the ASROC launcher was, and your ship takes a roll and you're looking up at the top of the waves. You know, you're already 20 foot up there and the waves are still 10 foot over your head. So basically, we were in the bottom of a trough that was, you almost had about a 25, 30 foot wave there. So some of the times that we caught heavy seas, that was, like I say, the time to joke about getting sub pay, because we seemed to spend about as much time underwater as we did on top of water. In fact, there was even one time when we were in the Philippines that we were in Subic Bay, and we were supposed to be there for a couple more days, and the typhoon was going to come through the Philippines. And I thought, okay, we're going to stay in port and everything's going to be okay. But what they do, the Navy did, is if you have destroyers in port tied up on the pier, and what they would do is they would usually tie one ship right on the pier, and then they'd go another destroyer outboard of that, and maybe another destroyer outboard of that, just because you didn't have the space to tie them up. And they said, you know, we can't do this. We're going to sea. So the day before the typhoon hit, we went out to sea, and it's just like, okay, we're going to hit this type of waves, but it was more dangerous for the ships to be tied up in port than it was for them to take on the high seas out there. So it's just like, okay, we're going out into a typhoon. It's just doesn't make any sense, but that was the safest place to be, believe it or not. So one of the other things that happened aboard the Leonard F. Mason, and this was December over Christmas of 1968. We came back to Yokosuka, and because the Leonard F. Mason was used in the Gemini program as a recovery ship back in 1966, and Gemini 8, with, of all people aboard, Neil Armstrong, for some reason they couldn't come down in their primary recovery area, and the Leonard F. Mason was over in Japan at the time, and it was the secondary recovery ship. So the Leonard F. Mason actually picked up Gemini 8, and Neil Armstrong, and I forgot who the other astronauts were, spent the night aboard the Leonard F. Mason. And not knowing that, what was it, would have been 3 years later, that Neil Armstrong would be the first one on the moon. But in December of '68, Apollo 8 was sent.
Did you get to meet Neil Armstrong?
No. That was in the summer of '66. That was about a year before I got on the Leonard F. Mason.
Okay.
And then in December '68 is when Gemini 8 went up, and the secondary recovery area was again going to be off Japan. So if Apollo 8 had any kind of problems, and they couldn't land in the primary area, then they would come down in the Western Pacific again. So they took us back to Yokosuka. They outfitted us with a special crane. They gave us a mock-up space capsule of Apollo 8, and we spent a couple days out in the Pacific off Japan. They'd throw the capsule in the water, then we'd pick it up and haul it on board. And so it was right after Christmas of '68 that Apollo 8 came back, but everything was fine in the primary landing zone. And so we just never, we just went out there. And as soon as Apollo 8 came down, then we went back to Yokosuka. They took the crane off, and then we've been back to the gun line again. So that was just kind of a special thing with Apollo 8.
Larry,
Now,
can we get to your service aboard the New Jersey?
Yep, that's the next thing right now. Because at the time, the Leonard F. Mason was home ported in Yokosuka. It was one of the ships that the Navy had that would routinely be home ported in Japan for 2 or 3 years and come back to the States for a year or so, then go back to Japan. So in early '69, when we were home ported in Yokosuka, those of us that had less than a year of active duty left, they started transferring us to ships that were going to rotate back to the States. And that was when I got orders to the New Jersey. I got the orders in February of '69, and they said, well, we'll meet her in Subic Bay sometime. And it was either and I don't remember the exact date, but it was late February or early March of 1969 that we caught up with New Jersey in Subic Bay, and that's when I reported aboard.
What were your first impressions when you saw the New Jersey for the first time?
I had saw her once over on the gun line in the fall of '68, but that was from a distance. And you don't realize how big the New Jersey is until you get up close. And I was used to 5-inch guns, and 5-inch guns are like pea shooters compared to the 16-inch guns. And so the first impression was, this ship is big. I mean, there's just no two ways about it. And I knew right away that whatever fire control system or procedures they had there, whatever I knew from destroyers, I was going to have to relearn how they did things aboard the New Jersey. They had 4 5-inch gun directors. They had 2 16-inch gun directors. They had the 3 turrets of 16-inch guns, and they had 10 5-inch guns. And so you knew what they could do was something special. And things were going to be different again. So we went back to the gun line on the New Jersey. Not that long. She was getting ready to come back to Long Beach. And we stayed, so we went there, oh, I don't know what it was, 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, probably about 3 weeks on the gun line. And then in early April, April 1st or something like that, we left the gun line to come back to the States. But one thing aboard the New Jersey, I don't remember these terms being used when I was aboard, but when I took the tour a few weeks ago, the forward gun director for the 16-inch guns, I think they call that Sky 1 and the aft Sky 2. Anyway, I was up in the forward gun director at night, and we never really had to do anything because unless you can use the radar to lock on the target or you can physically see the target with a rangefinder, you can't do anything with it anyway. So, but I was up there, and I always, when we shelled at night with the destroyers, we used flashless powder. So they couldn't tell really, the VC or the North Vietnamese couldn't see where you were. So I thought, okay, I want to see what the 16-inch guns look like when they're firing at night. 16-inch guns don't use flashless powder. I stuck my head up out of the gun director, and I think they were firing either turret 1 or turret 2, and the flash from those guns, when your eyes are used to night vision, it was blinding, literally blinding. It was like, oh no, what have I done? I couldn't see the hand in front of my face, you know. It, like in the old days when you look at a flash bulb or you look at the sun right now, you can't see anything. I mean, that just...
Sorry.
That, yeah.
Can't get the phone to shut up.
Yeah. That flash was just intense. That's all I don't know what, I can't describe it any other way. I mean, even now I see pictures of the New Jersey firing the guns, and you see the flash coming out of the rifle, out of the barrel. But in the middle of the night, when your eyes are adjusted for night vision, and I kept going over in my mind, I said, don't let him call up here for anything. Don't let him call up to the gun director to ask me anything, because I couldn't see the hand in front of my face for a half hour afterwards. You know, it's just what it does to your eyes. You know, it's worse than looking at the sun. So it wasn't like, what do you want to say, the concussion of the gun or the boom that the gun makes or anything. It was just the intensity of the flash out of the muzzle. Because I don't think New Jersey cared if the VC knew where we were, you know. And I don't know that the bags of powder that they used, that if there was anything that was flashless. The 5-inch guns had the flashless powder, but the 16-inch, I don't even think they did. So that was one of the experiences over there. And
Larry, where did you spend most of your time on the New Jersey? Where were you stationed?
In forward plot. In forward plot, there was actually 2 compartments down there. One of the compartments had the computer that ran the 16-inch guns, and then we had our compartment, which had 2 of the Mark I Able computers. So that's where I was most of the time, because that was where my experience was mostly on the destroyers, is with the computer, the Mark I Able. And so with 2 computers, 2 stable elements, we could control, or we could do 2 targets at one time there. You had a whole bank of switches. I don't know if you've been on the tour, if you've been down in forward plot, but you had a whole bank of switches back there. So we could switch any computer to any gun mount. And so it depends upon how many 5-inch guns they wanted firing at a time and how many targets you had. And aft plot, I used to go back there, but not much. They either had 1 or 2 Mark I able computers, so you know they could take on a couple targets at the same time too. So the New Jersey capabilities was just so far and above what a destroyer could do, even with the 5-inch guns. And I know they told me that even our 5-inch Mark I able computer, if in an emergency situation, could fire the 16-inch guns. We never did, at least not when I was aboard. You know, but I was told that we had the capability of doing that. The ship had to be at a slower speed, but most of the gunfire support we did in the New Jersey, we were basically dead in the water anyway. So the only time they ever concerned themselves with the ship not being dead in the water was when they were up and off North Vietnam. And we stopped bombing the North, I think in late '68, something like that. And so the New Jersey came back down by the DMZ and by I Corps mostly. But when you bomb the North, and kind of digress a little bit here to the destroyers, because they would shoot back up there. In fact, I think that's when the New Jersey took gunfire. And aboard the Hole and aboard the Leonard F. Mason, we took gunfire from the North Vietnamese. We'd always operate with 2 destroyers up north. One would have the primary target, one would have any counter battery or secondary target. So you'd always go in about maybe 20, 25 knots, and the first ship would fire at the target, and the second ship, in fact, going back to the Leonard F. Mason a minute, I can still remember one of my buddies up in the gun director, Glenn Woodward, screaming in the headphones, you know, counter battery, when the North Vietnamese started shooting back. And we had control down in plot. And it was just like, well, how fast can I flip the switches to give Woody the control and the gun director? And that took a few seconds. And I don't know how he did it, but he had those guns on that target, the North Vietnamese guns, and they stopped shooting at us. I don't know if we hit them, or it was just like, well, we're going to take a couple pot shots at these destroyers, and when they finally figure out where we are, we're going to stop shooting. I don't know. So they might have just stopped anyway, or he might have hit them. But it was just, I don't think I'll ever forget Woody's screaming, counter battery, when they started shooting. So anyway, that was, we were mostly
feeling to be able to shoot back, even if you don't know what you hit.
Yeah, and the big thing was they stopped shooting at us. That's what counted. But yeah, even aboard in New Jersey, we were basically dead in the water, or moving at a very slow speed whenever we would fire and gunfire support. So.
Did you take any hits from shore gunfire on either your destroyer duty or the New Jersey?
No, we never did. I don't know about New Jersey. I don't think she did. I don't really know, because that happened when they shot at the New Jersey. That was a couple months before I got on it. But we didn't aboard the destroyers. But I've read history before, and during the Vietnam War, There were 19 Navy ships that were hit, mostly destroyers. I think a cruiser or two got hit. So it wasn't just floating out there in the blue water and, you know, having an easy time of it. The Navy didn't, just because you got shot at, the Navy never recognized it as combat. That's just the way it was. I don't know what they call combat, the Navy, but being shot at is not a criteria. So we, aboard the Mason, we never got any kind of, you know, I guess there's a medal for combat action or something like that. And I think the New Jersey might have earned that. But yeah, just being shot at is not a criteria for combat in the Navy. So kind of a sore point with me. One of the other sore points, and I got a couple of New Jersey things here. The other sore point is for years, the Department of Defense, the Veterans Administration, never wanted to recognize Navy as Vietnam veterans. They would classify us, first of all, as Vietnam era veterans because we never got dust on our boots. And it's just like, okay, when I was on the Hole, we anchored inside Da Nang Harbor, a quarter mile from shore. We shot over the base at targets, VC targets in Da Nang. But I guess that isn't called being in country. You know, I was in the territorial waters of North Vietnam, but that isn't in country. In the territorial waters off I-Corps and the DMZ, but that isn't in country. And they always made that distinction. And I always say my cousin, who was a postal clerk in the Navy, was attached to a CB unit in Chu Lai for a year. He never left the base, never fired a shot at anybody, never had anybody shoot at him, but he's classified, he was originally classified as a Vietnam veteran because he was in country. And I couldn't tell you how many thousands of rounds I pulled the trigger on, but us blue water sailors were always classified as Vietnam era veterans. That's changed, fortunately, and that started changing when they built the wall in the 80s, but where Vietnam veterans were finally recognized for what they did and who they were. But yeah, that was also a sore point with me. But anyway, that's digressing. But anyway, what we did in New Jersey, we stayed in the gun line for, I said about 3 weeks, and then she was scheduled to rotate back to Long Beach. So on the way back to Yokosuka, Japan from the gun line, we hit kind of the tail end of typhoon there. And I remember I was down in Plot. Another thing about the New Jersey, what's so unique about it, and how big that ship is. I was down in Fort Plot, and I kept feeling a vibration a little bit in the ship. And I thought, well, you know, what's that? And so I went topside, and we were probably in 10 or 15 foot seas, and the New Jersey is so big that in those type of seas, you just 3 decks down, you felt a little bit of vibration. Didn't feel any roll, didn't feel any pitching, but you felt a little vibration. And I thought, if I was aboard the Mason or the Hole, we'd have been like a cork in a bathtub with a little kid making splashes in it. I mean, you're just all over the place. But that ship is so big, and I know I've seen video on YouTube of the New Jersey, you know, pitching in heavy seas. But in 10 or 15 foot seas, it was like being on a cruise ship. I mean, they're just, you hardly knew you were out to sea. It was so big, so stable, and so rock solid. I mean, that was just the big difference right there. But anyway, we went back to Yokosuka, Japan, offloaded a bunch of stuff, joined 3 destroyers, and we were on our way back to Long Beach. And we were oh, what was it? 3 days, 4 days, 5 days, something like that, out of Yokosuka. And I remember being topside in the middle of the morning, and the three destroyers were out in front of us, kind of a wedge shape, and we were trailing them by 1,000, 2,000 yards. And all of a sudden, the New Jersey makes this U-turn, just like you were in your car in the middle of the street. We made a U-turn as quick as we could, and the three destroyers kept going east. They still kept going that way, and I thought, what in the world's going on? And I thought, well, maybe we had a man overboard or something, and they didn't call it right away, and we had to go back, because that's what you did if you had a man overboard. And I was in a couple of situations, not from our ship, but from other ships, one off a carrier in previous years where they had a man overboard. And I thought, well, maybe we had that. Well, the captain came on our TV. We had a TV system aboard the New Jersey then. And he said, we just got word that they shot down an unarmed Air Force reconnaissance plane off North Korea. He says, we're on our way back to Korea. So we went up to flank speed, which New Jersey is what, 32, 33 knots, something like that. And went back to Yokosuka, got in late in the afternoon, spent the night. I even think we took on more rounds, more shells, because we had offloaded some in Japan. We took those back, pulled out of Yokosuka the next morning, went around the southern end of Japan and off into the Sea of Japan. Went about as close to Korea as we could, and we spent, I don't know, week and a half. It was less than 2 weeks off Korea. And as a show of force, if you will, the United States said, you shot down one of our unarmed planes over in international airspace. And I think a carrier joined us, and I think, although I never saw the carrier, I think they were close by, and I think a couple destroyers came up there. But we pretty much got about as close to Korea as we could. We were on heightened alert. Let's just say we weren't at general quarters. We were at heightened alert for the whole time. And it was just like, okay, I dare you to do anything. Just, that's basically the attitude the government took. And we did everything we could to provoke them, if you will. That's my opinion. But they never did. However it got resolved, it resolved diplomatically. So I guess you could say we were not only a Vietnam War veteran, New Jersey, but it's also a Korean War veteran, because the Korean War, even to this day, is still officially a war. I mean, they signed a ceasefire, an armistice, but they were still technically at war with North Korea. So I guess I can call myself a Korean War veteran too, even though this was in April of '69. So we stayed there, and then they finally said, okay, crisis over, go back to Yokosuka. We pulled in there, and then we, all by ourselves, we headed back to Long Beach. We got into Long Beach. Instead of getting in mid-April like we were supposed to, we got in, what was it, 8 May? I could be, I'm probably wrong on the date, but it was early May. We got into Long Beach 3 weeks, 4 weeks later, something like that. And we spent the summer training, repair of the ship, refurbishing whatever we had to. Spent a lot of time in training off San Clemente. Took a tour, a goodwill tour, if you will, up to San Francisco in the summer of '69. First time I'd been to San Francisco. Going under the Golden Gate Bridge is neat. You look at the Golden Gate Bridge out there, you look at the New Jersey and say, Golden Gate Bridge is high. And New Jersey is pretty high too. So, but we have plenty of clearance, but we did a we did a we went to Hawaii that summer, spent a few days there. Remember one of the few times I had to stand shore patrol in Hawaii. New Jersey had assigned so many for shore patrol because the Navy uses the Marines, but the shore patrol is basically, and you can't call it volunteer, but there's hardly any permanent shore patrol. It's kind of interesting. The night before I stood shore patrol at the EM Club, and I don't mean this to be politically incorrect or correct, but there was a race problem at the EM Club. There were some fights there. And I thought, okay, now I got to stand shore patrol the next night at the EM Club. And I thought, oh no, what are we going to get into? But everything was peaceful the next night, fortunately. So we came back. In fact, I was in Hawaii then when Neil Armstrong did land on the moon. I remember being in the EM Club then and watching it on TV. So we came back in August to Long Beach, did the final preparations, went down to Seal Beach where they had the ammunition depot and just armed ourselves to the teeth with the 16-inch projectiles, the 5-inch. I mean, we were fully loaded because we were about a week and a half away from going back to Vietnam, which would have been my 4th deployment over there, but the New Jersey 2nd. And we came back to Long Beach, and in late August, and I can't remember the date, I want to say it was August 24th, 25th, 26th, or something like that, about a week and a half before because we were going to go back to Vietnam right after Labor Day. That's when word came down from the Department of Defense that Nixon was cutting the budget. Now, this is only an internet rumor, I'll say that, is that the New Jersey was at the top of the list because for the North Vietnamese to come to the peace table, they said, we will not talk to you unless you do not send the New Jersey back because of the gunfire support, the damage that it was doing. I'll say to this day, the New Jersey as a single unit did more damage in the short time she was over there than any other single unit that the Navy, Marines, or Army or Air Force had. Our gunfire support was more accurate than the bombs that they dropped from Navy or Air Force planes. Those 16-inch shells destroyed tunnels, underground bunkers, which the VC had. Our 5-inch guns gave more accurate fire support, gunfire support than any strafing or anything could do. I mean, the New Jersey was the single most powerful weapon in Vietnam. And the internet rumor is, and I'll just say that, and I think it's true, is that the VC would not, and the North Vietnamese would not come to the peace table if New Jersey was coming back. And that is the first time that our politicians really gave in to the social unrest and protesting, and also the North Vietnamese because of the war. To this day, I believe there aren't as many names on the wall because of what the Navy did. And there are too many names on the wall because they did not send the New Jersey back. But that's my opinion. I mean, the way we supported the Marines and the Army, And if they would have sent the New Jersey back for the remainder of the combat action till 73, which could have been up to 3 to 4 years, and what, 2 or 3, 4 deployments in New Jersey, there wouldn't be 58,000 names on the wall. It'd be far less. And no matter what people said or did at that time, and I know there was one, oh, what was he? He wasn't a yeoman, he started writing letters. I think he wrote to every senator or congressman, saying tactfully, don't be so stupid, send us back. And I don't think there's a man aboard ship that thought that that was the right thing. I mean, each one of us, you get tired of war. That would have been my 4th deployment. I'll make no bones about it. I was getting kind of tired of going over there, especially because of the protesting and the seemingly lack of progress we're making over there. But each and every guy wanted to go back. And I mean, if we could have disobeyed an order as a ship, we'd have put to sea right then. So,
Larry, to support what you're saying, we have interviews with quite a few Marine and Army personnel who were in Vietnam, who testified to the New Jersey and its gunfire support saving their lives. So that supports what you're saying.
a few years ago, in Arizona, it's a challenge to go fishing. We have to drive a long way to find any place to fish. But I drove up to Cottonwood, Arizona, about 90 miles north of Phoenix. Up there, I met a guy. He had a Navy hat on, so I thought, yeah, I got to talk to him. I got to find out what he did. He said he's a corpsman. And he says, he said, I spent 9 years in the States as a corpsman, never aboard ship, never left the States. And then he said back in late 68, he was assigned to a Marine unit to go to Vietnam. And he said, I remember one time we were, I don't know, for lack of better terms, pinned down or something by the VC. They were in a firefight. And he says, I remember hearing the 16-inch shells of the New Jersey going overhead. He says, slamming into the hillside ahead of us. And he says, basically, that's what got us out of the day, if you will. And I says, well, when was that? And he says, well, it was March 69. I says, hey, that might have been me pulling the trigger. And it was just kind of neat. Then also meeting a guy. Yeah, he was a corpsman with a Marine unit, and just saying that same thing. Hey, you guys bailed us out because of what you did. Because see, that's the thing about decommissioning in New Jersey. The range on those 16-inch guns is 23 miles. That's a long ways. The 5-inch guns, we could get 10, 11 miles, something like that. The cruisers maybe could get 15 or 16, but then the phony argument that they had from Washington was, well, we can send a couple extra destroyers over there and they'll take the place in New Jersey. Wait a minute, a 55-pound shell that can go 12 miles is going to replace a 2,000-pound shell that can go 23 miles. Think about it. The math just doesn't add up. You couldn't do with destroyers and the cruisers what you could with the New Jersey. It was just impossible. And so it was a unique ship. Want to relate a couple things about the mothballing after they said they were going to mothball us. But one thing, about 2 years ago, I saw a documentary on Netflix, and I forgot who did it, but basically it was we're going to list the 10 most powerful ships the world has ever seen. And I thought, okay, it's about 45 minutes long, so I'll watch it. And they had couple of the Japanese battleships. They had the German battleship Bismarck. They had a carrier on. They had, I think, even a submarine because of the missiles that they had on it. And I don't remember all the ships, but they went from 10, 9 down to number 2. And I thought, well, wait a minute. Where's, I also thought the battleships, our battleships were kind of, should rank right up there. And I thought, well, we're down to number 1. And then they had a little break and they came back and they said, well, the most formidable ships the world has ever seen, they said, was not a single ship, but it was a class of ships. And I knew right away it was, and then they said the Iowa class battleships, the Iowa, the 61, New Jersey 62, Missouri 63, Wisconsin 64. And then they went into telling how, or their reasons for selecting those ships as the most formidable warships the world has ever known. And part of it was when they put the Tomahawk missiles on and the phalanx gun system, but still it was, the original configuration of that. And I thought, well, that's, and I was impressed. And I thought, hey, I was stationed aboard there. I was part of it. And I'm still impressed by what they say about that. But that is, of all the warships that any nation has ever produced, has ever put to sea, the Iowa, New Jersey, Missouri, and Wisconsin were the most formidable in the world. And I guess there was, 2 of them that weren't even built, and there was another class of battleships that was on the drawing board that was even bigger. So, but anyway, in early September then, we put to sea, just took our time, went up to Puget Sound, went down into Puget Sound, down in Bremerton, Washington, and tied up there in early September. And they said the timetable is 100 days to put this in mothballs. So we, as fire control technicians, we had you painted everything, you sealed out the gun directors. They even had us take wire, if you will, and put around the knobs on the computer. And I don't know why. It's like, who's going to turn them if it's in mothballs? But so that nothing would turn and nothing would move inside the Mark I Ables. Had us secure the stable element, clean everything up, and we actually, as a ship, beat the 100 days for mothballing, and it was officially decommissioned on 17 December. I got off the New Jersey because they told us anybody that had less than 6 months of active duty would be retained aboard the New Jersey. Then as we got close to mothballing day or decommissioning day, they would start releasing us. I was released from active duty on 2 December of '69, 2 weeks and a day before she was decommissioned. They said, well, we got to have a couple guys from your division stay aboard for the ceremony. We had one guy from Boston, and he says, hey, he says, I've got no reason to get back home that early, and I'll still get home before Christmas. He said, I'll stay. So the rest of us got off in early December. And that was it. I got a taxi out to Seattle-Tacoma Airport. Didn't want to go back to Wisconsin. There's just nothing back there. Got on an airplane for Los Angeles, flew into LAX, and when I got off the plane, as I always say, I didn't have a job, didn't have a car, didn't have a place to stay, didn't know anybody, and nobody cared, because Vietnam vets weren't welcome home, and just began life over. And fortunately, that thankfully, a week and a half later, I called the personnel director at RCA Computer Systems, and he says, "So you want a job working on our computers?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "What were you in the Navy?" And I said, "I was a fire control tech." And I was just going to say, "Do you know what fire control techs do?" Because I'd have people say, "Oh, you put out fires." Well, no, not really. And before I could even say that, he basically said, "How soon can you get down here?" Because he knew the training that fire control techs had and the experience that we had. And let's just say he didn't agree with the protesters.
Where was that job, Larry?
In Los Angeles. In Los Angeles. In fact, as a matter of fact, I had to, 2 weeks later, I found myself on an airplane back to Philadelphia to go to Cherry Hill, New Jersey for 3 months in the middle of winter, of all times, to go to the RCA Systems computer electronics school. So,
That's,
yeah,
that's just down the road from where I live here, where we are now.
yeah, if I would have known that at the time, but yeah, 3 months in Cherry Hill in the middle of winter, January, February, and March. So,
It's better than Buffalo in the winter.
yeah, that is. You know, one of the things also, because of protesters, I mentioned that, you know, obviously we weren't welcome back, but I never had any experiences. A friend of mine is a combat medic, and he said when he got out, he had a rock thrown at him, and it hit him, and he was called names when he got back, and other guys had some other problems, and they recommended to us that we not wear our uniform home. They said, you know, change the civilian clothes, don't wear a uniform home. And I thought, no way. I thought, I've been over there for 3 deployments, got a handful of, what do you want to say, ribbons or medals or something like that. Especially the one with the Vietnam Service Medal again, because that wasn't based on deployments, it's based on when you're over there during campaigns, during certain times. There's like 17 or 15 or 16 or 17 things. And so I got a handful of little stars to put on there. And I thought, there's no way that I'm going to fly into LA without my uniform on. If somebody's got a problem with it, that's their problem, not mine. And needless to say, I got a kind of a cool reception in LAX, and even I rented a car, and it was even more cool from the rental agency, but nobody ever said anything bad. Nobody ever did anything. And to me, the protesters didn't affect me until the mid-70s, when we were pulling out of Vietnam completely, when Saigon fell. And the company I worked for then had some economic problems, and I was laid off. And I don't say this proudly, but I applied for jobs, had on my resume U.S. Navy, and I never heard back from these people. And after a week looking for a job, I told my wife, because I had a wife, 2 kids, or one and one on the way at the time, and mortgage to pay, and I thought, I need a job. And I said, I'm going to take off my resume U.S. Navy. And I started passing out those resumes, and I started getting calls back. As soon as I took that off, that was the prejudice in the mid-70s. Still, they didn't have the riots then, but they still had the prejudice against veterans that if you And I've talked to veterans over the years, and they said, oh, we're not proud of it, but we had to do the same thing. We had to take off. We were in the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, and in order to get a job. And that was just the fact of life then. But things started changing when they designed the wall, built the wall. But, and this is a couple stories just kind of down the road. 1997, with a friend of mine up in Prescott, Arizona, it's about 90 miles north of here. We were at the museum, because the first capital of Arizona was in Prescott. We were at the museum there, and one of the volunteers came up to us, and he's 20 years older than I am. And it was Veterans Day, November 11, 1997. And she said to him, are you a veteran? And he said, yeah. He says, I served in World War II. And she said, well, thank you for your service. We really appreciate that. She's real nice to him. Then he looked at her and he said, he's a veteran too of Vietnam. And she turned to me, stuck out her hand, and said, thank you for your service. We appreciate it. And I thought, after 28 years, the first time somebody had said something, thank you for your service, because of service in Vietnam. And that was partly, I think, because the attitudes have started changing, because the guys come back from the Gulf War. And a few years ago, I had a chance to be in the parade in Phoenix on Veterans Day. And Phoenix puts on one of the biggest Veterans Day parades in the U.S., bar none. I don't know if it's the biggest, but if it isn't, it's pretty close. And a friend of mine who was a combat medic, he says, hey, I know this guy that's pulling a truck that has a trailer behind it, a couple Pearl Harbor survivors, and he's looking for guys to kind of fill his trailer. And just going down, everybody was saying, thank you, thanks for your service, waving. You can always tell a veteran by their hat. Everybody's got their Vietnam vet or Korean War vet hat, and they were standing up and saluting. And I turned to my buddy and I says, where are the protesters now? You see the guys, the veterans come back, Vietnam, Korean, who are, as they say, the forgotten ones, and they're being afforded the respect and honor that they should be. And all of a sudden, that the newsreels of the 60s and the 70s of the protesters, there's nobody that has a bumper sticker that says, I was a protester. But there's all kinds of guys that have a bumper sticker, Vietnam vet or so on. I mean, the attitudes have changed. In fact, this past Friday, Veterans Day, grandkids took me out for breakfast again, and we went to the parade, and just as a spectator. And obviously I have my Navy shirt and my Navy hat on. You always do that. And there must have been 50 people that were part of the parade that came and shook my hand and the hands of the veterans and just said thank you. I mean, kids that if you said, where's Vietnam, and they couldn't find it on the map probably, were just thanking everybody. And it's just the attitudes have changed just completely. And you can't forget what happened 40, 50 years ago, but it isn't like that anymore. And I'm just thankful for that. Not that anybody's glorifying war, but at least they're honoring those that served.
That's what it's all about, Larry, service, regardless of the political situation at the time.
Yeah.
Those men served their country. They did their duty.
But people couldn't separate it. Another story about protesters. I'm rambling on here. Flying back from Illinois, this is now 5 years ago, I sat next to a lady on the airplane, and she was about my age, maybe couple years younger, and we got talking about um, what we, where we came from and so on, and got talking about college in the 1960s, and I says, yeah, mine was interrupted by Vietnam. And I just kind of mentioned a few things, and I said I served over there, and I asked, well, what was it like in college for you back then? And she kind of looked at me and said, I was one of those protesters. And all of a sudden, our conversation just stopped. It ceased. It's like, and I thought to myself, well, how do I react? Here it is now, 40 years later. What is my reaction to these people, these protesters? And then she initiated the conversation again and said, I was basically, in so many words, she said, I was young and dumb. And she says, I got caught up in this. And she said, I was a protester and I was wrong. Now, I have never heard a protester say that they apologized or that they were sorry. I have only heard them say that they were wrong. So, but anyway, she did say that. And then we just started talking about other things. But I thought, yeah, I have to make sure I deal with this right, and that I can't hold the grudge against them, because whether like it or not, they were exercising the right that I was over there fighting for, if you will. Not to make my service above, to put me up on a pedestal and put her down. I don't mean it that way, but that's basically what it's about. So anyway, that's my military experience from day one. So I served on active duty just a little less than 4 years, 3 years, 9 months. I had 2 years of obviously inactive reserve. When I was aboard New Jersey, they did what they could to get me to re-enlist. Part of it was guaranteeing me C school, guaranteeing me E5 or FTG2, Petty Officer Second Class status. Part of it was $10,000 re-enlistment bonus, because FTs were getting, and $10,000 back in 1969 was a lot of money. But Vietnam was still as intense as ever. There was no end in sight, and I'll be honest, I got tired of going to war. Done 3 deployments, almost a 4th, and I kept thinking, even if I go to C school, it's going to be a 4th, a 5th, a 6th deployment, and keep doing it. And so decided, because I had every intention in college of making the military career, but it was obviously as an officer because of our OTC. So there's just a lot of expectations that went unfulfilled or unmet. And so Navy was a good experience. Never deny that. Had some good times, had some times that were not so good. But
Larry, were you ever eligible for OCS? And was no degree disqualifying?
basically that was it. I had more college credits than some of the officers that I served under. But because I didn't have the piece of paper, the degree, it would have been very difficult. And so just, and if I would have went back to college right away, I finally went back and got my degree in 1986 and 87. But if I even would have got my degree right away, I would have been, let's say I was 26 years old when I got out. I would have been 27 or 28, and I think that was over the age limit to go back in
As an,
as an officer. So it was just, okay, that was the end of my military career.